Acts chapter 4, still there. It's quite an interesting narrative. Well, okay. The thing that we've been talking about is one of the marks of these first generation Christians. And the mark was outrageous generosity. That we're back, if you look at verse 32, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. This is a statement of generous stewardship. Okay? There's, in my mind, there's really only one reason that they could claim that their possessions were not their own, and then as a result of that, be willing to share everything they had. The reason is they realized God was the owner. They were the stewards. And so as a steward, we do what we understand the owner would want done. Okay. Verse 33, with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And I've talked a lot about that. And then the next sentence, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. Now this, actually, it's a little bit counterintuitive for me. The grace of God was so powerfully at work in them. That is a huge concept. I just have this warped perspective sometimes, which if the church today was more open to, more responsive to God's grace, there would be this powerful kind of, influence in our communities. I'm not saying that all churches are sick and they need to be reorganized and redone, and I'm not that. But I just know that the churches that have the greatest impact, and I'm talking about the congregations, that have the greatest impact in their communities are the ones where grace is most at work. God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. Is that the only sign of God's grace working powerfully in a group of people, in a congregation of believers? No, but it ought to be a mark. Now, I'm thinking, okay, let's walk that back. All right, the grace of God was so powerful at work that there were no needy persons among them. Now, let's think about what was the community? What was the size of this community of believers? And this was, the church was confined at this point to Jerusalem. Well, we know it was at least 5,000. You think about that. Now, that would have been 5,000 adults. In those days, families were not small. So you multiply that probably by 4 times. And okay, you get about 20,000 people in this community, if you count the kids. Maybe not that many, but once you get past 5,000, that's a huge community. I mean, I live in a state where most of the towns in this state don't have 5,000 people in them. So let's do a little bit of math relationship work here. with that many people in this community and there being no needy people in it, that's uh, granted. This could just be, kind of a broad generalization. No needy people. Maybe there was one or two. I don't know. I kind of want to take this literally. That they were so generous, so moved by God's grace, that they sought out the needy to give them appropriate help. I don't think it's not that, and everybody was on the same level. I don't think that. I don't think an accurate interpretation of this implies it. What it implies is the poor had been assisted to the point that they were no longer needy. So did they have the same income as everybody here have the same? No, they're not. It just wouldn't have worked that way. I guess part of what makes me hop up and down on this, aspect is a lot of people in our country, as I'm recording this, apparently think socialism is the way to move, the way to go, and it's the most helpful, useful approach. I do not. And some of them, as Christians, are looking at this narrative in the book of Acts and saying, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's God's design. It is not. In my opinion, it is not according to God's design. Generosity is according to God's design. And when you think about the size of this community and think about culture back then, you had virtually no middle class. You had the wealthy and you had the poor. There was just very little in between. It's not like our economic and social order today. So if there were no needy, it doesn't mean there were no poor. There is the poor, and these are people who don't make much money. They don't have much income. But the poor can get by. The needy, well, that's the next level down, and they barely can get by. Those are the people who this generosity assisted the most and the most effectively. It wasn't like we're going to redistribute wealth here. No. The apostles never decreed this. They administered it, apparently, but they didn't decree it. This was a move of God's Spirit. This was a move of His grace at work in followers of Jesus who wanted to be generous as stewards of all God had put in their possession. Okay. I could go on and on, but I've already said most of what I've got to say about it. So now, Luke goes on to give us some insight into kind of how that worked out. And he says, from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Sorry, I'm having brain belch issues today. But from time to time is an interesting concept. Doesn't mean just continuously. It meant every once in a while. People who owned land or houses sold them. Does that mean they sold their own house right out from under them? I don't think so. Does that mean they sold, if there were farmers, they sold off their farm? I don't think, that's not what I get. What I get is these people that sold houses and land, these were houses that they owned and probably rented or leased or, but I don't think it was their own house where they lived. And I don't think they just sold off all their property. That's not the implication, especially in the broader context. But these were people of means. Remember, I can't. It's going to sound like I'm anal retentive about this idea, but economically, there was the rich and the poor. Almost nothing in between. The middle class virtually didn't exist. These were people in the people of means. These were people who were wealthy. They sold off some of their wealth and they brought it to the apostles. They put it at the apostles' feet. Does that mean they literally just dropped it right down there? No. I think they brought it for the apostles to administer its distribution, which is, it's right there. They put it at the apostles' feet and it was distributed to anyone who had need. I see, sometimes I get hung up on these little things, but who did the administration? Was it the apostles who did that, or did they designate people to do that? Well, I think at the beginning it was the apostles. And this is just me, but I think probably the one guy who had the most background in finance was Matthew. He'd been a tax collector. So maybe Matthew was like, here, let's figure this thing out. And he was bright enough and had enough background to do that. But they figured it out. And this was not just on human power. This also was a result of God's grace at work among them. And they distributed these gifts of financial means to the needy, not to everyone, to the needy. I'm sorry, I just keep pounding away at that. Then in verse 36, it's personalized a little bit. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. Barnabas. Okay. His actual name was Joseph. He was a Levite. Now, let's think about this whole picture of who Joseph was. Joseph was a Levite. That's no small thing. The tribe of Levi, the Levites, had been ordained by God to take care of first the tabernacle and then the temple. That was still intact in this day. So he was not quite connected to royalty because priests were not royal, but they had considerable authority. He was of that tribe from Cyprus, meaning, I don't know whether he had, as an adult, moved to Jerusalem from Cyprus, or recently, or as a kid. It doesn't matter. He was a little bit of a transplant from Cyprus to Jerusalem. But here's the thing I most like about Barnabas. The apostles called him son of encouragement. I would love it if my reputation was founded on the fact that I am an encourager. I want to be a son of encouragement. I want encouragement to kind of splash out of me, to be the backwash of when I'm with people. I'm afraid it isn't always, but I want it to be. And I think that's a pretty good goal for any follower of Jesus. we're going to talk some more about that next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.